The last time Alara Vance had worn heels, her grandmother had been alive. Her hair had been shorter, and she had still believed, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has never been proven wrong in a controlled environment, that romantic love was primarily a cataloging problem. You simply needed to find the correct specimen, label it properly, store it under the right conditions, and it would last. Simple as that. Archival logic applied to the human heart. That was 7 years ago. Tonight she was wearing heels again. If you've ever had your heart surprised by someone who wasn't part of the plan, or if you just love a love story that earns it, hit that like button and subscribe. This one is going to matter. The heels in question were black, modest by any reasonable standard, with a 2-inch lift that made Alara feel like she was standing on the edge of a very small cliff. They had been chosen by her friend Priya, with the same decisive authority with which Priya made all her choices. Quickly, confidently, and with complete disregard for the preferences of anyone else in the room. "You own exactly 1 pair of heels," Priya had said, holding them up in Alara's apartment 3 hours ago, turning them like an archaeologist assessing a find. "These are them. You're wearing them." "I was going to wear my brown Oxfords," Alara had said. "I know you were." Priya had set the heels down on the kitchen counter with the finality of a gavel. "That's why I'm here." The third member of their trio, Simone, had been sitting cross-legged on Alara's bed, surrounded by the organized chaos of Alara's closet, which had been emptied onto every available surface. Simone had not said much. She rarely did in situations like this, preferring to serve as moral support in the form of silent solidarity and the occasional encouraging noise. "What I'm unclear on," Alara had said, accepting the heels because it was always faster to accept things from Priya than to resist them, "is why this is necessary at all. I'm meeting a stranger for drinks. That's all. This doesn't require a production. It requires you to look like a person who leaves her apartment voluntarily," Priya had said, which was, Alara had to admit, a more pointed observation than she would have preferred. She had left her apartment. Voluntarily. And she was now sitting in the corner booth of a place called the Velvet Echo, which was either the most beautiful room she had ever been in or the most aggressively romantic one, and she was struggling to determine whether there was a meaningful distinction. The booth was upholstered in midnight blue velvet that had been worn soft at the armrests. The lighting came from small amber globes suspended at varying heights from the ceiling, creating the impression of being inside a constellation, or a jar of fireflies depending on your mood. The stage at the far end of the room was low and intimate, fronted by a single microphone stand and a black grand piano that had the comfortable, settled look of something that had been loved for decades. The bar ran the length of the left wall, its surface so polished that the bottles behind it appeared to float, doubled, suspended in some secondary reality. It was, objectively, a beautiful room. Alara had chosen the corner booth specifically because it offered sightlines to both the entrance and the stage. This was not, she would tell you firmly, the behavior of a person with anxiety. It was the behavior of a person who understood space. Spatial awareness was a professional competency. She spent most of her working hours understanding how objects related to their environments, how context shaped meaning, how the position of a thing in a room could tell you almost everything about why it had been placed there. She was not, she insisted internally, hiding. She was simply positioned strategically. The bourbon she had ordered sat in front of her, mostly untouched. She had ordered it because it seemed like the kind of drink a person ordered in a place like this. Not because she particularly wanted bourbon, but because asking for the chamomile tea she actually wanted felt like a social error she couldn't recover from. The glass was heavy, beautiful, catching the amber light and throwing it back in a warm scatter across the table. She looked at it. She looked at her watch. 42 minutes. Liam, the man she was here to meet, the man whose name she had written in her planner with the careful, slightly reluctant penmanship of someone agreeing to something against their better judgment, was 42 minutes late. This had not, strictly speaking, surprised her. When Priya had announced that she had arranged something for Alara 3 weeks ago, Ilara had engaged with the project the way she engaged with most things, methodically, with a full review of the available evidence. She had been given a name, a profession, journalist, which had made her feel a cautious, preliminary kind of interest, because she had a weakness for people who paid close attention to things, and a mutual connection that was thin enough to be nearly theoretical. She had been shown one photograph, which was inconclusive in the way that most photographs of strangers were inconclusive. A face composed for the camera, friendly and pleasant, offering nothing particular. She had done what any reasonable person would do. She had looked him up, not obsessively, just thoroughly. The way she approached any research question, which was to say she had spent approximately 45 minutes on a Tuesday evening building a fairly complete picture of Liam Hartley, freelance journalist, age 31, contributor to several entertainment publications, and at least 2 outlets whose editorial standards she had clocked as middling. His work was fine. It was the kind of fine that meant technically proficient, but not especially interested in the people it was writing about. Coverage that was observant without being curious, which was, in Ilara's experience, the saddest possible combination. Still, Priya had asked. And Ilara had, at 32 years old, recently begun to accept that living entirely inside the climate-controlled quiet of her work and her apartment and her very specific set of personal habits was perhaps not the same thing as living a full life. This was a new and uncomfortable thought, and she was still in the early stages of deciding what to do with it. She had come to the Velvet Echo. She was wearing the heels. She was 42 minutes into waiting for a man who had not arrived. On the stage, a trio was playing: piano, upright bass, and a drummer working so delicately that the rhythm felt like a suggestion rather than a foundation. The music was the best thing about the evening so far. It moved the way water moves through light, unhurried and refractive, breaking into something new every time it touched a surface. Ilara had stopped pretending to look at her phone and had let herself just listen for the last 15 minutes. And there was a particular quality to the silence that gathered inside the music, between the notes, in the breath before the pianist's left hand came down, that she recognized. It was the same silence that lived in the reading room of the archive where she worked, the silence that collected in the margins of old documents, the specific quality of air that existed in spaces where important things had been kept long and carefully. She had grown up loving that silence. She had built her professional life around it. Her apartment was arranged around it. She watered her 2 plants in it and ate her meals in it, and on her better days, was genuinely grateful for it. But tonight, possibly because of the heels, or the bourbon she wasn't drinking, or the 42 minutes that had accumulated in the corner of her booth like an embarrassing debt, the silence felt different. Not peaceful, just empty. She was contemplating the particular texture of that emptiness when someone slid into the chair across from her. Not sat. Slid. It was the kind of movement that assumed permission rather than requesting it. Not aggressive, but certain, the way a key slides into a lock, as if the space had been waiting for exactly this shape to fill it. The woman wore a black overcoat that had seen weather before, its collar turned up, her hair in a loose arrangement that looked like something elegant had been interrupted mid-completion. She had the kind of face that took a moment to parse. Not because it was complicated, but because it was specific. Made up of details that didn't quite resolve into a single type until you'd looked long enough to understand that they weren't supposed to. High, angular cheekbones, a wide mouth, currently pressed thin, eyes that were, in this light, somewhere between dark brown and black. And that held the particular quality of someone who was used to being watched but was not, right now, enjoying it. She was not wearing stage makeup. There were shadows under her eyes. Her hands, when she set them on the table, were the hands of someone whose composure was being held together with a focused, deliberate effort. "Please," the woman said, and her voice was extraordinary, low and slightly rough, like a record that had been played often and had gathered a quality of character through use that it could not have had when new. "Please tell me you know who I am." Ilara blinked, I don't, she said. The woman. And this was the moment, though Alara didn't know it yet, though she had no framework for understanding what she was watching happen in the woman's expression, the very swift recalculation that moved through it like a current. The woman's eyes went to the entrance of the club, then back to Alara. A fraction of a second's hesitation, quick and decisive, like someone running a probability calculation in real time. Then tell me you're willing to pretend, she said. Just for 5 minutes, please. Later, Alara would spend a not inconsiderable amount of time considering that word. Please. She had heard it often in her life. Please and thank you were the architecture of her professional interactions, the polite load-bearing structures that held everything upright. She used them herself with genuine intent, not habit. She had heard the word in every register a person could deploy it in. Casually, absently, impatiently, performatively. She had not, before this moment, heard it used like a thing being offered. Like the word itself was a kind of trust being extended across a table to a stranger, with full knowledge of how little protection it offered the person doing the extending. The woman was watching her with an expression that was very carefully not desperate. That effort, the maintenance of composure while composure was genuinely difficult, was itself a kind of eloquence that Alara, who spent her professional life reading the surfaces of things for evidence of what lay underneath, understood immediately. Something was wrong. Something immediate and unresolved was happening. And this woman had made a fast decision about Alara, not about her specifically, perhaps, but about the corner booth and the empty chair and the particular look of someone sitting alone in a place they hadn't entirely chosen to be, and had decided that whatever Alara was, she was a safer option than the alternative. Alara looked past the woman, toward the entrance. A man was standing there, scanning the room. He was tall, with the alert, slightly predatory posture of someone looking for something specific. He had a shoulder bag that was too functional for the room's aesthetic. He was turning his head slowly, methodically. Alara looked back at the woman across from her. Okay, she said. The woman's breath left her in a way that suggested it had been held for longer than the conversation warranted. Thank you. She straightened slightly, composing herself, her hands settling more naturally on the table. Her voice, when she spoke again, was doing something slightly different. Warmer, with a practiced ease layered over the exhaustion underneath. She was, Alara realized, performing. Not dishonestly, but professionally, the way an actor might choose to engage with an improvised scene. Keeping the lines clean, maintaining the fiction with craft. I love this table, she said, with a small, natural-seeming smile, speaking at a volume that was conversational but projectable. You always get us the good corner. It does have the best sightlines, Alara said, and something about her own ease surprised her. The woman's eyes moved to her quickly, and there was a flicker in them. Amusement, or its close cousin, recognition. As if Alara had said something unexpected, and it had pleased her. I've been saying that for years, she said. No one ever agrees with me. Most people don't think about how they're positioned in a room, Alara said. They just choose what looks comfortable and sit in it. And you don't? I choose what offers the most information, Alara said, which often happens to be comfortable. It's just not the reason. The man at the entrance had moved further into the room. He was closer now, still scanning, not yet looking in their direction. The woman across from Alara did not visibly track him. She was too skilled for that. But there was a quality to her stillness that indicated awareness, the focused, peripheral attention of someone who could account for everything in a room while appearing to focus on only one thing. Alara had seen that quality before. She had it herself, in the archive, moving through a room full of objects that required simultaneous, careful management. She recognized it the way she recognized a familiar handwriting style in a document she'd never read before. The technique was different, but the impulse was the same. My name is Alara, she said quietly. If we're going to be people who know each other. The woman's expression did something she probably didn't entirely mean for it to do. A softening, small and quick, like a light source shifting by a few degrees. Juniper, she said. June, if you'd rather. Juniper is better, Alara said. It's specific. Most people find it strange. Most people conflate strange with specific. They're not the same. Juniper. And she would be Juniper to Alara from this moment on, always, because the name had a quality that matched the woman in ways that Alara couldn't fully articulate yet, but already felt the truth of. Juniper looked at her with something that was approaching curiosity now. Real curiosity, not performed warmth. The kind that asked a question it actually wanted answered. What do you do? She asked. If I can ask. I'm an archivist, Alara said. At the Whitmore Museum. Special collections. Juniper nodded slowly. You preserve things. I do. What kinds of things? Documents, mostly. Letters, maps, items that have been deemed significant. Or that will be once someone understands them properly. She paused. She didn't usually say that last part aloud. Everything in my care was important to someone, at some point. Some of it hasn't been important to anyone in a very long time. My job is to make sure it survives until it finds the right context again. Something moved across Juniper's face that Alara couldn't immediately identify. Not quite sadness, something adjacent to it. A recognition, perhaps, of something in the statement that landed unexpectedly close to a feeling she'd been carrying without naming. That's a beautiful way to work, Juniper said quietly. It's the only way I know how, Alara said. What do you do? A beat. I sing, Juniper said. And then, with a quality of deliberate simplicity that Alara would later understand, was one of Juniper's most careful and least visible forms of protection. The choice to understate what was large, to make herself smaller than her circumstances in conversation, to offer the plain fact before the complicated one. She said, I sing here, mostly, at the Velvet Echo. I've been performing here for about 2 years. Alara processed this. She looked at the woman across from her. The overcoat with its turned-up collar, the unfinished arrangement of her hair, the shadows under her extraordinary eyes, the rough silk of her voice even in ordinary speech. And she thought about what it meant that this woman had been performing in this room and had arrived at her table tonight, with that particular quality of a person who was running. She did not ask about it. It wasn't the right time, and she understood instinctively, with the same instinct that told her when a document was fragile, when handling would cause damage, that asking directly would be the wrong approach to whatever was happening here. Instead, she said, Is there anything else I should know? About us? Juniper glanced at the man again, who was now moving toward the bar, his back briefly to them. We met 6 months ago, she said. Through a mutual friend. We've been getting dinner here most Fridays. You always order the same thing. What do I order? Something you think suits the room better than it suits you. Alara felt something. A small, precise pressure, like the point of a very fine instrument. The observation was too accurate to be improvised. It was the kind of thing you said about someone you'd watched for a while, or the kind of thing you said because you recognized the habit in yourself. That's disturbingly perceptive for 5 minutes of acquaintance, Alara said. I've been watching people in rooms like this for a long time, Juniper said. You get good at the taxonomy. She paused. Also, you're sitting in front of a full glass of bourbon that you clearly don't want. Alara looked down at the glass. It seemed appropriate. For the room? For the occasion. I was supposed to be meeting someone. I felt I should look. She searched for the word and landed, reluctantly, on honesty. Like a person who had made a comfortable choice. Juniper was quiet for a moment. Then, with a careful softness that had nothing performed in it. Who were you meeting? Someone named Liam, Ilara said. He's 46 minutes late now. She paused. He was arranged for me by a well-meaning friend who believes my life is underpopulated. Is she wrong? Another one of those precise pressures. Ilara found that she couldn't quite produce the dismissal she would normally reach for. Not entirely, she admitted. Juniper said nothing, but there was something in her stillness that was different from the earlier, calculated stillness. This one had warmth in it, a quality of genuine attention that didn't require anything in return, and it was this that made it different from the professional ease Ilara had been watching her deploy. This was not performance. This was just the way she listened. The man at the bar had turned around. He was looking at the room again, more systematically now. He's going to come this way, Juniper said, very quietly. Not alarmed, but prepared, the way a person prepares who has had to be prepared before, who has built a fluency in the handling of their own difficulty. What does he want? Ilara asked, matching her quiet. A beat. Brief enough that Ilara might have missed the hesitation if she hadn't been paying the kind of attention she paid to everything, which was thorough and patient, and attuned to the small hesitations that most people overlooked. A story, Juniper said. One I haven't chosen to tell. Ilara looked at the man. She looked at Juniper. She thought, with a swift and unglamorous practicality that was one of her more functional traits, about what she had read about Liam Hartley in 45 minutes on a Tuesday evening. Liam Hartley, she said. Juniper went very still. Freelance, Ilara continued. Entertainment beat, mostly. He had a piece pulled last year from a publication I can actually name. Pulled, not corrected. Which means the problem wasn't factual accuracy, but ethics. He was sourcing from people who hadn't consented to be sources. She paused. Priya called him a great guy with interesting work. Another pause. Priya's instincts about people have a roughly 40% success rate. Juniper stared at her. The performance had dropped entirely. The exhaustion was visible now, and underneath it something that was not quite hope, but that might, if handled carefully, develop in that direction. You know him, she said. I was supposed to be having drinks with him, Ilara said. Before he was 47 minutes late. She considered. He didn't come here for the date. He came here for you. Juniper closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. It was such a specific, contained expression of something enormous that Ilara felt it in the same place she felt beautiful music, somewhere underneath her sternum, in the part of her that responded to precision. Yes, Juniper said, opening her eyes. I think so. Then we should leave, Ilara said, through the back. Juniper looked at her. Really looked, the way she perhaps had not allowed herself to before. Fully, without the filtering layer of performance or strategy. Why would you do that? She said. You don't know me. Ilara considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. It was not a rhetorical question. It was a genuine one, asked by someone who had enough experience with the unreliability of strangers that she had learned to ask it before accepting anything that looked like help. You said please, Ilara said, and you meant it. That's enough for now. The back exit of the Velvet Echo was through the kitchen, which the maitre d', a tall, silver-haired woman named Constance, who clearly knew Juniper well and asked 0 questions, guided them through with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to handling things discreetly. The kitchen was bright and loud, and smelled of butter and citrus, and something savory that Ilara couldn't immediately identify. And the cooks moved with the focused confidence of people who were very good at what they did and knew it. And nobody looked at them. And Constance opened a heavy door at the back that opened onto a narrow service alley. The alley was cold. Manhattan in October had the particular property of feeling colder than the temperature actually warranted. Something to do with the way the city channeled its own wind. The buildings creating corridors that the cold moved through with more intention than it had anywhere else. Ilara, who had grown up in a quieter city and had lived in New York for 6 years, and still sometimes felt the surprise of it. The specific density of this place, the way it was always more than you were prepared for, felt the cold move through her coat and register in her shoulders. Juniper pulled her overcoat tighter. She said nothing for a moment. They were standing in the alley, and the sounds of the club were muffled behind the heavy door, and the sounds of the city came from both ends. Traffic, a distant horn, the persistent low murmur that New York made at all hours, like a living thing's ongoing declaration of existence. Then Juniper said, "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me yet," Alara said. "We might have just traded one problem for another." "What problem?" "I came by cab." "I don't have a plan for where we're going." Juniper looked at her. And then, for the first time, the absolute first time, in this compressed and unlikely evening, she smiled. Not the practiced warmth of the performance in the club. Something else. Smaller, real, with an edge of surprise in it, like laughter that arrived before its own announcement. "Neither do I," she said. So they walked. This was the part of the story that Alara would later find difficult to describe, not because it lacked clarity, but because it had the quality of certain important experiences in which the details are simultaneously perfectly ordinary and irreducibly significant, and any attempt to explain the significance makes the ordinariness sound like a metaphor, when it was, in fact, just the thing itself. They walked. That was all. They walked out of the alley and turned north without consulting each other about the direction, and moved through the October night streets of Manhattan, which were lit and busy and beautiful in the specific way of the city at night, when the artificiality of all that light against the dark sky stops being garish and becomes something closer to honest, an admission, bright and unapologetic, of the human determination to push the dark back. They didn't speak immediately. The silence between them was different now than the silence of the club had been. The club's silence had been the silence around a performance, weighted and anticipatory. This silence was different. It was moving, for one thing, which changes the nature of silence, makes it less like an absence and more like a companion, something you carry along with you as you move. Alara was not normally comfortable in silence with strangers. She was comfortable in silence. Absolutely, genuinely, it was one of her more reliable pleasures. But the silence of strangers was a different register, usually loaded with the social pressure of conversation that was expected and not yet arrived. This silence had neither the pressure nor the expectation, and she wasn't sure whether that was because the evening had already been strange enough that normal social rules felt suspended, or because of something specific to Juniper herself. The quality of someone who was not apparently afraid of what silence might reveal. The first thing Juniper said, unprompted, when they had been walking for about 2 minutes. "I haven't walked anywhere in weeks." Alara processed this. "You've been in cabs. Cabs, cars, the back entrance of the club, the back entrance of the hotel where I've been staying, the back entrance of basically everything." She said it without complaint, flatly, observationally, the way you report a condition you have adjusted to but not entirely accepted. "I've been back in New York for 3 months, and I've seen more of the interior of cars than I have of the city." "Where were you before?" "Touring. Before that, Chicago. Before that, a year of things that don't parse into a tidy answer." She was quiet for a moment. "I grew up in Brooklyn. When I was a kid, I used to walk everywhere. Hours. I knew every neighborhood by the specific way the light hit the buildings at different times of day. I used to think that's how cities actually worked. You had to walk them to understand them, the way you had to read a book all the way through instead of just the summary." "That's exactly how they work," Alara said. Juniper glanced at her. "Maps are records of how people have moved through spaces," Alara said. "The oldest maps we have are walking maps. They represent knowledge that was generated by people using their own bodies to understand the world around them. When cities switched from being places you walked through to being places you drove through, The relationship between people and their urban environments changed fundamentally. We started living inside a summarized version of the city instead of the actual one. She paused. Sorry, that got long. Don't apologize, Juniper said. There was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Not surprise exactly, but the particular attentiveness of someone who has encountered something they weren't expecting to encounter. You talk about your work like you love it. I do love it. Most people sound like they're apologizing for their work when they explain it, like they expect you to be bored. Why would anyone explain something they loved in a way that expected boredom? Ilara said. Because most people have been bored by enough explanations of things they love that they've learned to preemptively minimize, Juniper said. So they minimize first, before you can do it to them. She said this with the careful precision of someone describing a pattern they had identified, perhaps in their own behavior. Ilara was quiet for a moment. A cab passed. Someone laughed far behind them. The city produced its continuous ambient evidence of its own ongoing enormity. Do you do that? Ilara asked. What? Minimize first. A pause. When I'm not on stage, yes, Juniper said. Constantly. On stage, it's the opposite. Everything gets larger. The feeling, the voice, the space between you and the audience. She tilted her head slightly, emotion that read as thought rather than gesture. That's part of why I find offstage hard. The contrast is very stark. What do you feel like off stage? Small, Juniper said. Usually, like I'm wearing something that almost fits. Ilara thought about this. She thought about the quality of the word almost and what it meant to live perpetually inside an almost. She was familiar with a different version of the same feeling, though she had never described it that way to herself. The feeling of being precisely suited to a particular environment and slightly misaligned with everything outside it. The feeling of being excellent at your work and uncertain about everything the work didn't cover. I feel the opposite, she said. I'm very comfortable in my work and quite uncomfortable in spaces like the one we just left. Places with music. Places that require a kind of performance I haven't practiced, Ilara said. I know how to be competent. I know how to be careful. I know how to look after things that have been put in my care. She hesitated. A small hesitation, the kind that occurred when honesty was being prepared rather than deferred. I don't know how to be spontaneous, present in a way that doesn't involve managing something. Juniper was quiet. I came tonight, Ilara continued, because my friend told me my life was underpopulated and I was unable to articulate a convincing counter-argument, which is itself evidence for her position. Juniper made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was its closest neighbor, a soft, genuine exhalation that had warmth in it. That's the most honest thing I've heard anyone say about going on a date. I try not to disguise my motivations even when they're unflattering. That must be exhausting. Less exhausting than the alternative, Ilara said. They had reached a small park, not the grand, intentional sort, but the minor key Manhattan kind, a half-block of carefully maintained green tucked between buildings, with wrought iron benches and a path of pale stone, and a single large tree that had turned the full, unreserved gold of deep October. The tree was lit from below by a ground lamp, and its light was extraordinary. The gold of the leaves amplified by the specific quality of the lamp, thrown against the dark of the surrounding buildings, impossibly vivid against the orange-black of the city sky. They stopped without agreeing to stop. Ilara looked at the tree. She heard Juniper exhale slowly beside her, not tiredly, not sadly, but with the quality of someone releasing something. She looked sideways and found Juniper looking at the tree with an expression that was unguarded in a way she had not yet seen. Open, uncalculating, her face simply doing what it was doing without managing it. She looked very tired, and very beautiful, and for the first time all evening, like she had stopped running somewhere in the last half-block without quite noticing. "Can I ask you something?" Juniper said. She was still looking at the tree. "Yes," Alara said. "The man, Liam. You said you'd read about him." She paused. "You read about him because he was your blind date?" "I read about him because I read about anyone I'm going to meet," Alara said. "Not obsessively. Just, I like to have context. I find context makes interactions more legible. Most people don't do that. I know. Most people operate on impression and adjust retroactively when the impression is wrong. I find the adjustment phase uncomfortable, so I try to reduce the amount of adjustment necessary." She considered. "It also means I occasionally arrive at a situation with more information than is socially expected, which can be alarming." "I was going to say useful," Alara said. "But yes, I've been told it's alarming." Juniper was quiet for a moment. "What did you find out about him?" "That his ethics were questionable and his sourcing practices had been formally challenged," Alara said. "The specific detail that matters is that he had a piece pulled, which, as I mentioned, means a factual defense was not available to him. The problem was how he got the information, not whether the information was accurate." She paused. "What does he have on you? If you're willing to tell me." A long pause. Longer than the others. Alara waited, because waiting was something she was genuinely good at. She did it all day, in the archive, waiting for documents to yield their meaning in the patient light of a reading room. She did not hurry the pause. "Nothing on me," Juniper said finally. "On my family." She was still looking at the tree, her voice even. "My younger brother. He made some decisions a few years ago, financial decisions, bad ones, the kind that have a legal dimension. He's resolved them. He paid what he owed. He served a conditional sentence. He's been clean on every front for 2 years now." She exhaled. "But if someone prints it in a way that connects it to me, to my name, to the club, to this moment in my career, it becomes a story about me, about my family, about whether I'm who the audience thinks I am." She paused. "He found out about it through a friend of a friend. That's not reporting. That's just someone wanting something to sell." Alara listened to this. All of it, not just the content, the structure of it, the care with which it was said, the way Juniper had organized the information to give her what was necessary without asking for anything specific in return. She was telling the truth, but she was telling it in a way that didn't make it a request. She was sharing without demanding a response. She was trusting without making the trust conditional on what Alara did with it. "He used the date to get into the club," Alara said. "I think so. I've been managing my entrances and exits carefully. It's a small industry and people talk, and I knew someone was working on something. But if he's in the room in a social context, not press, not a professional function." She stopped. "It's harder to ask someone to leave when they're just a person having drinks." "He used Priya," Alara said. "Probably not with ill intent on her part," Juniper said carefully. "No," Alara agreed. "Priya has excellent intentions and a 40% success rate. I've mentioned." She thought for a moment. "He's going to figure out we left." "Yes." "And he'll look for you." "Yes." "Then we have a limited window," Alara said, "before this becomes a different kind of evening." Juniper turned to look at her. The unguarded quality was still there, maybe because of the tree, or the cold, or the accumulated weight of the night, or because something about Alara herself, her directness maybe, or her patience, or the absence of performance between them, had created a space in which maintaining the armor was simply more effort than it was worth. "You don't have to be involved in this," Juniper said. "This is my problem. You were just a convenient chair." "I know I was a convenient chair," Alara said. "But here's what I find interesting." She looked at the tree. then back at Juniper. I've been sitting in that corner booth for 47 minutes, wondering why I came tonight, and whether I would ever naturally arrive at a situation that felt like it was worth the discomfort of showing up for something I wasn't sure I was capable of. And then you sat down. I'm not... Juniper began. I know you're not a sign, Alara said. I don't believe in signs. I believe in the evidence of my own experience, which is that I have been more myself in the last 30 minutes than I was for the 47 that preceded them. And I'd rather stay in this situation than go back to pretending to want bourbon. She paused. So, what do you need? The silence this time was different again. Not moving silence, not weighted silence. Something quieter than both of those. The silence of someone standing at the edge of a thing they had not expected to find. I need him to leave me alone, Juniper said. Long enough for me to get my brother somewhere safe. He's staying with me at the hotel. He came down from Boston 2 days ago because I asked him to. Because I wanted him somewhere I could see. Somewhere I could make sure he was okay. She pressed her lips together. If Liam publishes before I've had a chance to manage the context, he won't, Alara said. Juniper looked at her. I know what I have on him, Alara said. The ethics complaint was formal and documented. The publication that pulled his piece did so in writing, and the letters. I found 2 of them in a public record request I traced through a media transparency archive we have access to at the museum. Not conclusive in a legal sense, but conclusive in a professional one. She paused. I can tell him that. I can tell him that I know, and that I will make what I know known if he publishes anything that was sourced in the way his previous work was sourced. He doesn't know who I am. He certainly doesn't know that Priya's blind date for me was an archivist. Juniper stared at her. He came here for leverage, Alara continued. This is just counter-leverage. It's not glamorous, and it's not a permanent solution, but it should be sufficient for tonight. There was a long moment. The tree cast its gold light upward and outward, improbably beautiful, and the city murmured around them with its bottomless, indifferent energy. And Juniper Thorne, who had been performing in one register or another for most of her evening and most of her adult life, who was exhausted and careful and running on the specific adrenaline of someone who had been braced for a problem for weeks, looked at Alara Vance and said, Who are you? Alara felt something move through her. Not the small, precise pressure of earlier. Something larger. Something that was, she would not admit for several weeks, but would eventually. Warmth. The particular, rare warmth of being seen in a way that you had not specifically arranged for anyone to see you. The warmth of specificity, of being known for a thing you actually were. An archivist, she said. I told you. Juniper's mouth curved. You said that like it explains everything. To me it does, Alara said. And then, because the evening had already exceeded every frame she had built for it, because the heels and the bourbon and the 47 minutes of waiting had given way to this particular tree in this particular corner of the city, to this particular quality of conversation with this particular woman who she had not been looking for, and had found anyway. Alara Vance let herself stand in the warmth of being known, however briefly, by a stranger who felt less and less like one, and she did not minimize it. She let it be the size it actually was. Liam Hartley appeared 11 minutes later. He came from the south end of the small park, which meant he had been looking for a while, and he had the look of someone whose patience had curdled. Not angry exactly, but tight with the particular frustration of a person who has a plan and has encountered friction in the execution of it. He was carrying his shoulder bag, and there was a small, discreet camera in his hand, not yet raised, but present, announced. He stopped when he saw them. Alara had seen him coming for about 45 seconds before he arrived, because she was positioned to see, because she always positioned herself to see, because sightlines were professional and personal both, and because she had been standing in a park with a woman who mattered, and she had not stopped paying attention to what was around them. She had made no particular gesture. She had simply, quietly, shifted so that she was slightly forward of Juniper's position. Not a shield, nothing so dramatic, just a choice about where to stand. Liam looked from Alara to Juniper and back again. He processed the positioning. He took a step forward. "Juniper," he said, "I just want 5 minutes." "You had 67 minutes at the club," Alara said. "You chose not to use them." He looked at her. He hadn't been expecting her to speak. He hadn't, she suspected, been expecting her specifically at all. He'd been expecting Juniper's manager, or a publicist, or some categorical form of resistance he had a prepared response for. He didn't have a prepared response for a woman he'd stood up on a blind date. "I'm sorry about," he began. "Don't," Alara said, with a pleasantness that was entirely genuine and entirely without warmth. "You used Priya to get access to this club, and you were never going to come to that table. That's not what I'm interested in discussing." She paused. "What I'm interested in is this. I know about the ethics complaint filed against your work with Meridian Media in 2022. I know the piece was pulled on grounds of unauthorized sourcing. I know there were 2 letters exchanged, one from the subject's legal representative and one from the editor, both of which are accessible through a public record mechanism that most journalists know about and most subjects don't." She kept her voice very even. "I'm an archivist. Finding things is my professional competency. If anything attributed to anonymous sourcing about Juniper Thorne's family is published in the next month, I will spend 45 minutes on a very specific Tuesday evening, and I will put together a very thorough document about your methods, and I will send it to every publication that currently pays you, and to every publication that might." She smiled, genuinely, because she was not angry. She was simply very clear. "Have a good evening, Liam. I'm sorry the date didn't work out." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a person recalculating their situation rapidly and finding the numbers do not favor their original plan. Liam looked at the camera in his hand. He looked at Alara. He looked at Juniper, who was watching him with the expression of someone who has been afraid of a specific thing for a long time, and is now watching it be handled by someone else, and is not sure what to do with the strange, disorienting relief of that. Liam put the camera in his bag. "This isn't," he began. "Over," Alara agreed. "Yes, have a good evening." He went. After he had rounded the corner and disappeared, the park returned to itself. The tree was still there, still casting its gold light upward, patient and unhurried, as large and generous with its beauty as it had been before any of this happened. Juniper said nothing for a long time. Alara waited. Then, "You're going to want to explain that." "What part?" "The part where you threatened a journalist with an archival research project." "I didn't threaten him," Alara said. "I described a likely future action in neutral terms." Juniper made the almost laugh sound again. This time it went all the way. The laugh was extraordinary. Low, genuine, helpless at its own edges. The laugh of someone who has not laughed in a while and is slightly surprised by how much they needed to. It lasted only a few seconds, but it changed the quality of the air around it, the way a stone changes a still pool, sending its effect outward in widening rings. Alara felt the rings. "I've never had anyone do that for me," Juniper said. Not dramatically. Quietly, as a statement of fact, offered to the city and the tree and the air, rather than specifically to Alara. "Do what?" "Just put themselves in front of something." She paused. "Without asking what they get for it." Alara thought about this, about what the honest answer was. The honest answer was complicated, because the truth was that she hadn't been calculating what she got for it, hadn't been thinking about it at all, had simply moved because the situation called for it and she was there and capable. But there was something else true, too. Something she was still assembling the language for. Something to do with the 37 minutes of walking, and the way Juniper had talked about her brother and the gold tree, and the laugh that had changed the air. I get to be in this, she said finally. This conversation, this evening, whatever this is. She paused. That seems like enough. Juniper turned to look at her. The light from the tree was between them, warm and specific. The gold of old documents, the color of something preserved. Juniper's face was, in this light, a document in itself, something with a history visible in it, if you knew how to look. A surface with depth, a thing that had been somewhere before it was here, and had brought that somewhere with it. Alara was very aware that she was looking, that she had been looking, that she had not, at any point in this evening, wanted to look away. I don't know what to do with you, Juniper said. Not helplessly, carefully, like someone naming a problem they're not sure how to solve but are committed to taking seriously. You don't have to do anything with me, Alara said. You can just stand here. That seems fine. Juniper looked at her for another moment. Then she exhaled and tilted her head back and looked up through the gold tree at the orange dark sky and said, I want to see where you work. Alara blinked. The archive? The archive. It's... She considered the appropriate response to this request. It's not normally open to the public at midnight. Is there a morning option? The warmth again, moving through her, unhurried and clear. I can arrange a morning option, she said. Juniper lowered her head and looked at her. The exhaustion was still there, but something else had settled in over it. Not resolution, not the tidy end of something, but the quality of a person who has put down something heavy and has not yet decided what to pick up next, and in the meantime is simply standing in the fact of the relief. Then here, she said, and she reached into the pocket of her overcoat and produced a pen, a small, worn ballpoint, the kind that lives in coat pockets and survives through sheer unlikelihood. And she took the napkin from the club that Alara had, without quite realizing she was doing it, tucked into her own coat pocket when they'd left through the kitchen. She wrote something on it. She set it on the table of the nearest bench. Morning, she said. Morning, Alara agreed. Juniper walked back toward the lights of the avenue, her overcoat moving with her hands in her pockets, her silhouette becoming a part of the city's ongoing and indifferent inventory of moving things. Alara stood for a moment. She looked at the napkin on the bench. She picked it up carefully, the way she handled things that needed to be preserved. She looked at the number written in a handwriting that was, like everything else about Juniper Thorne, specific, angular and deliberate, and nothing like anyone else's. She put the napkin in her coat pocket. She stood under the gold tree for one more minute, in the cold October night, in her 2-inch heels, in the middle of the enormous ongoing hum of New York, and she thought, I came tonight because Priya told me my life was underpopulated. She was right, but not in the way she meant.